Go ahead.
Hi, and hi, and welcome to today's Conference Board pop-up webcast. I'm Mike Moran, Program Director for the Digital Strategy and Enterprise Digital Transformation Councils here at the Conference Board. I'm joined by my co-director, Tim Peter, and today our guest speaker is Dr. Augustine Fou. Dr. Fou is an industry-recognized thought leader in digital strategy and integrated marketing, and a former Chief Digital Officer of Omnicom's Healthcare Consultancy Group, a $100 million agency group serving pharma, medical device, and healthcare clients. Dr. Fou has over 22 years of management consulting experience creating and optimizing marketing across traditional and digital channels. Dr. Fou completed his PhD at MIT in Material Science and Engineering at the age of 23. During our discussion, you can use Adobe Connect to ask questions by typing into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We'll select a few questions at the end of the discussion and pose them to Augustine. I'm going to kick it off with the first question. Unfortunately, Dr. Fou is not available on camera today, but you will certainly hear his disembodied voice, and he's got a lot to say. So I'll start with the first question. So Dr. Fou, Augustine, what is ad fraud, and how big is that problem, and who does it really affect? I think that's probably the right starting point for our audience.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Tim. Ad fraud is probably a term that you've read about or heard about, but I think that there's still a lot of misconception about what it is or misinformation in the marketplace. But very simply, ad fraud in the digital space means ads that are shown to bots and not to humans. Right? So normally a marketer would expect that when they place ads online, they're actually seen by humans. Right? So that's how the internet started. So way back when Yahoo was around, basically when someone visited a page and the page loaded, then the ads load. Right? So that's the normal way you think about digital display ads. But these days, with the rise of programmatic ad tech, the websites, and some of these are fake sites that have no content on them, they can just add some ad tags onto the site and start running ads. So in these cases, these very long tail sites that nobody's ever heard of, they don't really have any human audience. So how do you think they generate the ad impressions? They basically use bots to cause the pages to load. So in this case, what ends up happening is that those ads are not shown to humans. And so the marketer is paying for something and they're not actually getting what they paid for. So, first and foremost is it really impacts the marketers. And there's other ripple effects which I can get into later, but just one example would be analytics are also messed up. Right? So if the bots are causing fake page views, fake traffic, fake impressions, and fake clicks, all of those get recorded in your analytics. So then your analytics are messed up to an unknown degree. So as a marketer, especially like a direct marketer, if they're optimizing for things like click-through rates or other kind of what they consider performance metrics, if there's a whole bunch of clicks caused by bots, you got to scrub that out, right? Otherwise, those analytics are not correct. So that's kind of an overview of what it is.
So, Augustine, what should marketers do to protect themselves from ad fraud? Excuse me. Is using fraud detection technology enough, or how should marketers check to see if the fraud detection is working?
Yeah, I think the issue here is that the fraud detection technology companies and these services have all sprung up in the last couple of years because I think people are getting more and more aware of this issue. However, my general advice would be to not rely solely on those, right? So the fraud detection technologies are good and you should probably use them, but just imagine out there the hackers are better, right? The hackers hack, that's what they do, and if they're detected and caught, they'll find a way to work around it, right?
Well, it's sort of an arms race, right?
So you shouldn't rely solely. Yeah, that's the unfortunate part of it, and we're kind of up against the most advanced hackers out here, so you can't just rely on the technology detection alone. But that being said, most marketers have their own analytics, right? So I'll just use a very simple example, your own Google Analytics. And even in that, right, even if you don't have fraud detection technology in place, if you just look at your own analytics and look for some telltale signs, you can see that, you know, where there's something suspicious, you should look into that further. So let me give you a couple of easy examples. So I usually like to say it like this: if it's too high or too low or too consistent, something's wrong with that, right? Because humans are messy and they don't act all uniformly in the same way, right? So when you see something like 100% bounce rates, right, something's obviously wrong with that, right? Or when you see 0 time on site with a very large number of visits, something's wrong with that, right? But you know what I've seen over the years is that when you see those things like 100% bounce rates or 0 time on site, those are very characteristic of bot activity, because the bots really don't waste more time than they have to, right? So if their job is to click through from the ad to your page, they're going to get to your page and then immediately they're going to leave to do the next thing, right? Because they can't make more money by sticking around longer, right? So you know, many other research studies have kind of borne that out over the years. The bots are very practical. They're very efficient. So, you know, when you see things like 100% bounce rates or 0 time on site in your own analytics, then check to see where that traffic's coming from, because that means that they're probably not sending you high quality traffic. And there's other kind of things. I'll use the example of the too consistent, right? So in some of our clients' data, we're seeing, okay, the top 10 referring sites all send exactly 45,000 visits. Okay, so that's not normal. Okay, so every single one of the top 10 sites sends you exactly the same amount of traffic, right? Again, humans don't move that way. But in our experience, it's very easy to program a whole botnet to do exactly the same thing, right? So they'll say to the botnet, go hit this website 45,000 times, and the bots will do exactly that. So that's what I mean by, if you see things that are too consistent, something's wrong with that. You need to look further into that. So I think a lot of this does boil back down to your gut instinct. And, if you're an analytics person or a marketer that has looked at analytics over the years, you'll have a sense of what's normal, right? And when you see something that's kind of doesn't feel right, or your gut tells you something strange, that's when you look into it deeper. So in those cases, you don't need super advanced fraud detection technology, right? You can do some of this work yourself. And that's also a way to double check, right? So if you do have fraud detection technology in place, see if that's working, right? See if that cleans up the anomalous stuff that you see in your own analytics, right? If it's doing its job, you shouldn't see all this kind of strange looking stuff in your own analytics, right? So it's kind of like, as a marketer, you really should be looking at your own data and not just trusting the tech itself by itself, and not just trusting someone else to do it for you. So those are best practices.
Very cool. Good advice. We've been talking a little bit about fraud detection technology, so maybe you could take us through what are the kinds of fraud problems that people would have, and maybe help us understand what kinds of fraud detection technology can be helpful. I understand your point that even if all you do is turn on fraud detection technology, you're probably still vulnerable. But what are the kinds of fraudulent ad practices that marketers should understand, and what kinds of those practices can be at least somewhat detected by the fraud detection technologies?
Okay, well, that was a very loaded question, so I'll try to take it one step at a time. The kinds of fraud, let me just kind of map that to the purchase funnel. Okay, so at the very top of the funnel, you have ads, right, that are meant to generate awareness. So like I mentioned earlier, a good portion of those ad impressions are not seen by humans or not shown to humans. So that's part of the fraud. Now, unfortunately, some of the current fraud detection technology companies, they'll just kind of measure that and say, oh, your fraud percentage is 20%, or your fraud percentage is 90%. And then they don't give you any further details, so there's really not anything you as a marketer can then do, right? So, okay, you just told me it's... So what they end up tending to do is just say, oh, if they say it's 20%, then they're going to ask for a refund or a make good from the industry, right, or from the exchange or whatever. So, but typically that's after the fact. The money's already gone out the door into the pockets of the bad guys, and it's never coming back. right? So that's kind of the problem with that kind of stuff. So at the top of the funnel, you have fake ad impressions, meaning ads not shown to humans. In the middle part of the funnel would be clicks, right? So fake clicks or fraudulent clicks. So when you're dealing with search ads, and I'm talking specifically about search ads that show on other sites other than Google itself or Bing itself, right? Because when you turn on Search Partner Network, other sites can run those search ads, and in order for them to make money, they have to click on it, right? Because it's a CPC model. So those bots are programmed to click on all of the ads, right? In some cases, we see some greedy bad guys where there's 100% click-through rates, right? Because they have to click on it in order to make the money. So in those cases, the fraud detection technologies don't work in search ads. So you really have to look back at your own analytics. So in this case, if you have the Google AdWords interface or the Bing Ads interface, you're looking for telltale signs like 100% click-through rates, right? And so when you see those kind of things, then you look at the site from which those came, and you can clearly see some of these are fake sites. And if you wanted to really check, just go visit them and you'll see, right? So again, some of those things you can clean up on your own without any further advanced technology. And then in some other cases, there's other kinds of fraud, but I would characterize those more as obfuscation techniques. So to me, there's only two kinds of ad fraud. One is impression fraud, and the second is click fraud, right? One is just the quantity of impressions that you show and what portion of those get shown to bots. And the second would be those bots clicking on the search ads. So there's really those two kinds of fraud. The other stuff like impression stuffing or domain spoofing, all those things are just ways that the bad guys cover their tracks. So I don't call those forms of fraud. Those are just ways to hide the fraud so that typical reporting and whatever can't see it. Okay, so that's kind of how I break that out. So for most companies, it's like, if you want to use fraud detection technology companies to help you detect it, that's a good thing. But you don't necessarily have to use those, right? So there are just simple things you can do, looking at your own analytics to tell when something's strange. And then you just got to take action after that. So sometimes I even say you don't need to have extensive blacklists or things like that ahead of time. It's almost like when you turn on the campaign, within the first hour, within the first day, you should start to see, which things are normal and which things are abnormal. So you start to do the cleanup by blacklisting sites or turning off sites right at the beginning. And then once you do some of that kind of front-loaded work, then the rest of your campaign should be a lot cleaner.
So if you're a brand advertiser, right? So obviously when you're selling something, this can often get really easy because if somebody's clicking through, right? If a bot is clicking through but it's not making a purchase, you may stop running those campaigns anyway because they don't perform effectively. But if you're a brand marketer,
Yep.
How can branding companies measure for business outcomes when there is no sale attached to the traffic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a convenient excuse that a lot of folks have used in recent years is like, oh, well, we don't make sales online, so we don't have to track it. But that's, bad guys love that because you're
Right,
just
you're saying
giving
that's
them
a terrible
money,
idea?
right?
Is that
So
the case?
even for that's a terrible idea, yeah. But so you got to work a little bit harder, right? If you're going to be in marketing, if you're going to be a CMO, you got to work a little harder. So long story short is, even for branding, I'll use two examples. So for a CPG company, they can use proxy metrics that the bots really have no incentive to fake. So, clicks, it's easy to fake, right? So you shouldn't use that. Time on site, all that kind of stuff, it's easy to fake by the bots. But in that particular example for the CPG client, click and print coupon, right? So when the user prints a coupon, they usually take that to the grocery store to redeem it. So for that particular CPG company, we're looking at the rates of click and print coupons, right? So depending on the source of the media, right, we ran display ads, social media ads, search ads, and that kind of stuff. Each will have a different rate of someone actually printing off the coupon. And then after that, they have their own conversion metrics, right? They know that X percent of people who printed a coupon ultimately go to the store to redeem it. So that becomes a good proxy metric that can be directly correlated with offline sales, right? And that way they can judge the relative effectiveness of the different forms of media in terms of which one gave them the most or highest rate of click and print coupons. Now, the good thing is, in that particular case, bots have no financial motive to print off the coupon because they can't make more money that way. So we want to find the metrics that the bots have no incentive to fake, right? So in the case of the search ads, they have a financial motive to click because they have to click it in order to earn the fraudulent revenue, right? So they will do that. But the printing off of the coupon, they can't make more money doing that. Just like they can't make more money by staying on the page longer, right? So the bots are highly efficient. They're not going to waste their time doing something they can't make money on. Okay, so that's an example for a CPG company. The next quick example is from a pharma company, where in this case they do offline procedures, right? So they have a machine, they do offline surgeries and that kind of stuff. So in that case, they don't do any sales online either. But how did we pick the right metrics to give them a sense of whether their digital marketing is working or not and whether it's subject to fraud or not? We basically chose a two-step process. So when they do their ads and people come to their site, if they did a zip code search to see if there's a surgeon in their local city, right, in their hometown, then that's one step. But we know that typing in a zip code and clicking submit is very easy for a bot to do, so we took a second step after that, right? So when you typed in the zip code search, you get a list of the surgeons in your local area. Did they actually click to see more information about that surgeon, right? So we took that kind of a combo, two-step combo, and used that as the proxy, right? Because if people actually looked at the surgeon, did the zip code search and all that, they had their own internal metrics that said, okay, X% of those people actually went on to get the procedure, right? So in that case, that combo set of steps was something that the bots would have no financial motive to do. So it was kind of safe from being manipulated by the bots. So
and you're sort of creating a cart or a customer experience flow in such a way that you can tell if they take those subsequent actions, then clearly that's not a bot. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Like even though we don't see the actual sale, because those things happen in the offline world, those were good enough proxy metrics, and that we knew were safe from being faked by the bots. So you really want to choose those kind of metrics that are immune to, well, the bots can do it, right? But it's just that they don't have a financial motive to do it. That's why they're not going to waste time to do it. Okay, so try to find those metrics that the bots don't fake, and then you'll have much cleaner data.
So this may seem like an obvious question, but how can fraud detection be so wrong, right? Like if we run into all these challenges and we know these things come into play, but people also are buying into it, and you're saying they do make sense, how can both of those things be true, that they can be so wrong and also people buy into it?
Well, people are buying into it now because they want to actually do something about it, right? So if they tell their boss, oh yeah, we just hired this company or that company and we're doing fraud detection, okay, they did their thing, they checked that box, okay. But the reason, as a researcher, I can say that it only works in certain circumstances, but not in all circumstances. So really the key takeaway is not to not use them, but just to make sure you understand what they can do and what their limitations are, right? So most of the fraud detection technologies are great at detecting known bots and data centers. So data center would be very simple, like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Cloud and those Google Cloud and things like that. When you see traffic coming from data centers, you can kind of surmise it's not a human, right? Because humans access the internet through their mobile devices or through cable modems at home. So you should see Time Warner Cable, Comcast, and that kind of stuff. When you see traffic coming from Amazon Web Services, okay, that's kind of strange, right? So, and that's where most of the bots are created anyway. Okay, so when you see that, these fraud detection technologies can easily see that and pick that out, right? So they can detect something. And the other part of it is, the IAB has their bot list. So there's about 400 bots on that list. But as it turns out, these are all the good bots, right? Google bot, Bing bot, Facebook bot, and all these other bots that actually say their name honestly, right? The bad guys' bots don't say their name honestly. So the fraud detection technologies can easily pick out the bots that tell them they're a bot. Okay, but all the bad guys bots, the more sophisticated ones, disguise themselves as Internet Explorer, Chrome, and Safari, so you're not going to be able to pick them out by name. So again, there's a limitation to what fraud detection tech can do. So that's why I'm saying don't rely only on them, right? Still use them because they're going to pick off the obvious fraud so you don't have to deal with it. But then keep looking at your own analytics to try to find ways to corroborate whether it's even working or not. So I think that's really the key takeaways. Fraud detection technology is good, right? All those guys are good guys. They're trying to do the right thing. But just understand what they can do and what their limitations are, so you're not just saying, oh, well, we have the fraud detection tech, so we don't have to worry about it, right? That might be the case, but wouldn't it be better if you actually looked at your own data to see if it's true or not, right?
So this is all really good stuff, Augustine. I'd like to remind our audience that you can still ask a question of your own by typing it into the chat box, and Tim or I will read that question and pose it to Augustine. We've still got a couple of minutes left. Augustine, I wanted to ask kind of a more macro question. My suspicion is that in our audience, we probably have some people who are using some of these fraud detection techniques. Probably don't have anybody who's actually doing all the things you're recommending. But I bet we've probably got some people that aren't doing any of it at all. They're just letting their ad agency go run campaigns for them. Can you give us an idea of what the magnitude of the problem is? And is the problem bigger in some areas than in others? Like, is search fraud worse than video fraud, worse than programmatic? I mean, what are the areas that are like especially susceptible, and how much money is this actually costing advertisers?
I'll put it this way. I'll say it's costing a ton, a lot of money. But the reason I won't put a number on that is because all the other numbers that have been published out there are kind of extrapolations from small samples. So they're not that accurate. But I'll give you some ways to kind of gauge the relative amounts of fraud. Okay, so it really boils down to follow the money. And bad guys are very efficient. So where there's more money, they're going to go focus their attention there because they can get more money from the effort that they put in. So out of all the forms of digital marketing, right? So I'll just use, say, 4 buckets: impressions, clicks, leads, and sales. Right? Those are the 4 main buckets of digital ad spend, according to the IAB. The first 2 buckets, impressions and clicks, account for almost 94% of the digital spend. Right. So for all intents and purposes, that's where most of the spend is, and that's why most of the bad guys concentrate on these 2 buckets, because that's where most of the money is. Okay. So then the most rampant forms of fraud are fake impressions and fake clicks, as we mentioned earlier. Now within these, you can start kind of breaking it into, say, display ads versus video ads versus mobile ads. Right. So because video ads tend to have much, much higher CPMs, again, the bad guys are going to focus their bots on that first because they can make way more money per fake impression or per fake click on that. Right? So they're going to focus on video ads, and we see that. Even other fraud detection technology companies have reported in the past that video ad fraud is 3 to 5 times higher than display ads. Okay. Now, in the search side of things, it is still there. But it's a little bit harder because it's a 2-step process, right? The bot actually has to type in the keyword to cause the search ad to load, and then they have to click on the ad. So that's kind of relegated to some of the more advanced bots, right? The less advanced bots, all they have to do is load the page and they get the ad impression. For the search bots to work, they have to actually do 2 things. So it's a little bit more advanced. So that's kind of how I think about where the fraud is concentrated. Now, when we talk about, for the folks on the phone, there are certain industries that are subject to one kind of fraud over another, right? So I'll use, say, movie studios. Okay, the entertainment industry, because of the way they do their marketing, they have to blow out their budgets before a movie start date, right? A launch date. So ahead of the Wonder Woman launch, they have to spend all their marketing budget to get awareness. So because of that, they have to spend, everything by a certain date. Bad guys love that. because, again, there's a finite number of humans that go online. If you have to spend the inventory, you have to generate the ad impressions and so on and so forth. So the bad guys can use bots to generate as much inventory as possible to absorb all that. Right? So for certain industries, they're more subject to CPM fraud or impression fraud. And there's other industries like pharma and retail that's already very focused on search. So in those cases, they're more subject to the CPC fraud because that's where they spend more of their money. So those are generalizations, but that's kind of how I look at it. But I know we're at time, so I'll kind of turn it back over to you.
I think we have time for one more question. Tim, do you have one more to throw? It doesn't look like we have any from the audience.
Yeah, I've got one quick one. When we think about this problem, where it's going, right? Just from your perspective, as somebody who deals with this all the time and looks at this and considers it carefully, as you just said, there's a lot of money being wasted here. So where does this lead? I mean, is this a never-ending problem because the money's just going to chase the money and it's always going to be an arms race, or are some of the bigger platforms going to get more?
Yeah, this is not going to get solved unless and until the marketers do something, right? It's really up to the marketers who take money out of their pocket to pay for this stuff. If they don't do it, no one else is going to do it. So let me cite 3 quick examples. So Procter & Gamble took out $140 million from digital, and there was no decrease in business outcomes. Okay, that's great because now they can see we didn't have to spend that in the first place. Okay. Chase reduced their reach from 400,000 websites to 5,000 websites, a 99% decrease, and they saw no change in business results. Okay, and that was a ton of money they spent thinking that they were chasing all these people across 400,000 websites. It didn't matter. Okay, and then Restoration Hardware yesterday was quoted saying, out of 3,200 search keywords, only 21 were driving business outcomes for them. Okay, that's a 99% decrease, right? Or only 1% was actually driving business for them. So that's to say, for most marketers, the best way to tell is to actually run your own experiments. Okay, you don't have to cut out $140 million from your digital spend, but cut out 1%, cut out 2%. See if it matters. Run your own experiments and see what matters and what impacts and what doesn't impact. And that's the quickest way for you to find or get to the truth. And when marketers step in and do this, we're going to see resolution to this problem
really good
much
stuff.
more quickly.
Well, that's a great way to wrap. And
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Augustine. That's a great way to wrap up. It's terrific advice. And I'd like to thank you, Augustine, for taking the time to speak with us today. I'd also like to thank my co-host, Tim, and to the conference board for hosting, and thank you, our audience, for your participation. I hope you have a good day, and I hope we'll see you again next